Hi guys, today I have a really fun and exciting ceramics tutorial for us. We're gonna learn together how to make a ceramic bong or water pipe. Jumping right into it, you're going to just center and throw this piece how we normally would. I used anywhere from 2 to 3 pounds of clay, but you can use as much as you want, just depending on the size piece that you're wanting. The biggest thing we want to think about when we're throwing any type of bottleneck form is that we're having to ask the clay to make a really dramatic shift from that bottom belly to the top neck. So take it slow, allow your clay to be a little bit thicker. You can always trim that form a little neater near the end, and maybe using a clay that has some grog or grit to it is going to help give us some of that strength that we want. Notice when I start working on this top portion, I'm raising walls starting at that neck and moving up, and that's because when you collar, it gets thicker. It might also be helpful to use a heat gun to allow that clay to stiffen up while you're working on it. Every time you're adding water to the clay, it's getting just a little bit weaker, and since we're having the clay make that really dramatic shift, taking the time to allow it to stiffen up in between. I've seen artists use blow torches as well, especially if you're using a lot of clay for larger forms, but even just an old hair blow dryer works really great. So now you're just going to do your final shaping, and you've thrown your very first bong's body or form. I'm going to allow you to watch that one more time because I feel like that went really fast. Anytime we throw any kind of form, we're always going to start off with a solid foundation. So your solid foundation should look something like a classic cylinder vase form. It's at this point that we can start doing the shaping. So I spent just a little time bellowing out that belly, and now I'm focusing all my energy onto collaring the top. And again, as I'm squeezing, that clay's getting thicker, so I'll go in and I'll raise walls a bit, compressing the lip and evening out that lip as it's going to get uneven throughout this process. Taking a metal rib and smoothing and compressing the clay along the sides can also help give you some of that strength. Doing bottle forms like this takes time, practice, and patience, so I urge you to go slow, be gentle with yourself, and remind yourself that clay can be reclaimed and reused, so just have fun and really go for it. Another way we can make a bong's body is by throwing it in 2 separate pieces. So we're going to throw a basic kind of bowl shape. We're thinking about it as 2 pieces, so the wider bottom portion will be thrown in one piece and the taller, skinny portion thrown in another. So here is that bottom piece. I'll shape it a bit, keeping in mind that I want to leave that top lip a bit thicker to accommodate and allow me to attach the second piece that we're about to throw. I'm also going to measure that top lip with a pair of calipers and use that measurement to inform how wide the base of this second piece that I'm throwing needs to be so that they can attach nicely. This second piece doesn't need to have a foot or a base. It can be hollow, and we're going to focus on having it be the taller, skinnier part of the bong's form. So while we're at our wheel, the last thing we need to throw in order to have all the pieces for our bong is going to be this nice little hollow cylinder that is going to give us a nice little opening for our glass downstem and bowls to fit into. In order to know how wide we need to make this opening on our hollow cylinder, we need to know 2 things. We need to know the shrink rate of our clay, which you can test yourself, or you might be able to find that number available from your clay manufacturer. And you're going to need to know the outer diameter of whatever downstem you're going to use. I personally like to use standard 14mm downstems. I know the outer diameter of those downstems stems is going to be 18 millimeters. My clay shrink rate is 11%. And so I know by doing a little bit of basic math that 11% of 18 millimeters is going to be about 2 millimeters. And so I need to add 2 millimeters into that opening. So I need to make my opening about 20 millimeters. Now I also like to add a little bit of extra tolerance to allow me to fit in a rubber O-ring that you can get from a plumbing store, and those tend to be about 3 to 4 millimeters. So you'll give yourself about a tolerance, and you'll measure anywhere between 23 to 24 millimeters, again, depending on the shrink rate of your clay and the size downstem that you're wanting to use. The reason I like to have a little bit of a tolerance and to use those rubber O-rings is because it's really difficult to try and get your clay to be exactly the right size to fit a downstem perfectly every single time. Things warp in the kiln, sometimes your measurements were slightly off, your shrink rate might have been a little bit different, and so giving ourselves a rubber O-ring that has some flexibility and can fit within those tolerances is really helpful. So now we've thrown our pieces, we've allowed them to dry out a little bit and stiffen up, they're leather hard and they're ready to trim. But how do we trim something that has such a small mouth or opening, a small base to sit on? What we're going to use is we're going to use a chuck. Now if you don't know what a chuck is, it's essentially a big hollow cylinder that we've bisque fired that gives us a place to rest our bottle forms into to help us with trimming. So you can see my chuck here. You can make your own really, really easily next time you're doing a bisque fire. They're great tools to have, but you definitely need a chuck in order to trim them. Now, of course, we don't necessarily need to trim our pieces on a wheel. If you don't have a chuck, you could trim them by hand or just kind of smooth them out and not worry about having a foot. But if you are wanting a nice finished foot, having a chuck is definitely the way to do it. I have in the past, if I didn't have a ready fired bisque chuck, I have thrown greenware chucks and they've worked just fine, but for something of this scale, of this weight, having a fired chuck is probably going to be a little bit better. This might be another reason why you opt to throw your bong in 2 pieces. Throwing it in 2 pieces means you don't need a chuck in order to trim that base piece because it's essentially just like any other bowl or vase form. It has a normal shape and it's going to be very easy to trim. So now we have our feet fully trimmed and we're ready to start doing any attaching work that we might need to do. So for that bong that we threw in 2 separate pieces, it's time to go ahead and attach those pieces, doing a nice classic slip and score. I think it's always a good idea to add a support coil. I also find that adding a little bit of vinegar to my slip helps make sure things really attach really nicely, but just do this however your process looks for you, attaching and smoothing. So now, whether you threw your piece in 2 pieces or just 1, it's going to be time to attach that nice little cylinder that's going to give us a place to fit our downstem into. So this is going to be very similar to attaching a spout to a teapot. We're going to cut it at the angle that we need, mark where we're needing to cut a hole for it to stay nice and hollow, and just slip, score, do your support coils, and smooth and attach how you normally would. After this stage, make sure you dry your piece out nice and slow, especially since we have all of those attached pieces. We don't want any cracking. So now, fire your piece, glaze it however you like. I do recommend that you glaze it all the way around, including the inside. But there you go, there's my tutorial on how to make your own ceramic bong. If you're interested in learning more about my work and my live cast vulva pottery, go ahead and click a few links in the description, check out my website, and I'll see you next time.